Welcome in to Stop the Takes, football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that's Austin, and today we are continuing our draft reviews division by division. Today is the NFC East. We just wrapped up the AFC East, so check that one out, along with the AFC and NFC North. All three of those are out, so be sure to check those out. So without further ado, we'll jump into the NFC East, starting with the Washington Commanders. Um, Picking at 29 at the end of the first, they were a team that a lot of people, I think, just slotted an edge into consistently. But they end up going Josh Connerly, tackle out of Oregon, at pick 29 to help bolster up that offensive line to protect their new franchise quarterback, Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, man, loved their first round pick. They just let the board come to them. They needed a tackle in a bad way. They also helped that by trading for Laramie Tunsil from the Texans. They gave up a lot for Laramie Tunsil, but hey, you got one of the best left tackles in the NFL. Loved that trade in the offseason. So now you have bookend tackles that completely transform your offensive line. So loved the Connerly pick. Again, we've talked about this a lot, man. Protecting your young franchise quarterback is one of the most important things you can do as a franchise. I know that as a Colts fan with Andrew Luck, we didn't protect him, and it seemed fine in 2013 when you're drafting Braun Werner, but it's not fine because eventually it'll catch up to you.
Yeah, and it did. It tragically did. And honestly, his play style, RG3's play style didn't help, but I mean, his was kind of a freak thing that ended up happening, but a similar thing where he didn't have the best offensive line in front of him in his early days in Washington. So yeah, completely agree. Love the pick of taking Connerly at 29, not forcing, the edge pick there. I love the idea of after trading for Laramie, you have your starting left tackle in Laramie Tunsil. So go get your starting right tackle because they have Brandon Coleman is slotted to start there right now and technically still listed as a starter. I think we'd be surprised if Connerly didn't beat him out in camp in this off season for that starting job. So in one off season, you get both your starting tackles for your franchise quarterback, which is pretty solid.
Exactly, man. I mean, they're having one of the best off seasons, not just with the offensive line. They also attacked receiver. They went out and traded for Debo.
Yep.
So they what they did was Dakota. They didn't make a mistake that some teams make. They think, okay, we got to the playoffs last year. We got to the NFC Championship. We must have a good roster. They're smart enough to know, well, they didn't really have a good roster. What happened was that they hit big time on their rookie quarterback in Jay Daniels, and they're not resting on their laurels. They're saying, listen, we know we still have holes on this roster. We're going to go out and fix them. And they just made a great offense much better in the offseason. So I am very intrigued to see the step they take next year.
Yeah, and trading, that's part of the reason they only have 5 picks are from those trades. So you can almost equate some of these picks to Laramie Tunsil and, as you mentioned, Debo Samuel. But yeah, taking two guys who have larger contracts as well, but doing what the Texans tried to do, in the second season with CJ Stroud. When you have your quarterback on a rookie deal, you have the cap space to play with. You do not have to pay them yet, so go get guys that can help you make a splash right now. And it helps when you also draft well. If you add guys to the draft that can immediately become impact players for you. And I think they did that with Connerly and with the second round pick with Trey Amos, a guy that kind of, again, we've talked about this over and over, this corner class that just kept slipping down the consensus board. But they take Trey Amos in the second round, who will have the ability to go in and immediately compete for one of those starting corner jobs with, San Rastil's more of a slot guy. He's a good player, but he excels in the slot. So you kind of want him there. So then that kind of opens up the other two spots where they have an opportunity with Marshawn Lattimore they traded for, who didn't play quite like he normally did. So having some depth there and guys in there is needed, especially after the Emmanuel Forbes pick didn't work out a few years back.
Yeah, exactly. I thought they definitely needed to attack the secondary because, like you said, Marshawn Lattimore is kind of up in the air. That was another aggressive trade that they made that I thought
Yep.
was good process at the time. But listen, corners have a pretty short shelf life, man. They don't last that long. So getting a young guy in there that can compete for an outside corner position is definitely a good move, especially at the end of the second round when. Man, at the end of the process, dude, I was seeing Trey Amos mocked towards the end of the first round.
Yeah.
So you got a guy that some people believe was a first round talent and at the end of the second. at a very important position, man. We talk about, outside corner is one of the most important positions on defense. So love that pick as well. I mean, you got two highly impactful players at highly impactful positions with your first two picks. And like you said, when you make these aggressive moves trading, hitting on the draft, the few draft picks you have is going to be critical. And doesn't guarantee these guys are going to be hits, but they had good process at least in the draft and have set themselves up for another great season, I think.
Yeah. And then continuing to add around, their young quarterback in the 4th round when they take Jalen Lane, a bit of a speedster out of Virginia Tech, versatile guy, a little Debo-esque, with he has the punt return ability. And they also they handed the ball off to him a handful of times at Virginia Tech. Guy had started MTSU, transferred up. So really interesting pick, adding some more speed to that offense. Which I think is great. And pairing that as well with the 7th round pick, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, running back out of Arizona, who across everybody consensus was projected to go higher than the 7th round here, where they got some pretty good value.
Absolutely love the Ja'Cory pick, man. In the 7th round, this is a guy that was highly productive in 2023, had a 92.7 PFF grade, scored 17 touchdowns in 2023. But got hurt in 2024, so that's why you saw him slip in the draft. But I mean, just a guy that we like and follow in Dakota. Mike Renner had him ranked as 83 overall player, and you're getting that in the 7th round. I mean, listen, that's, like I say, tremendous value. I mean, in the 7th round, it's house money, dude. If you get any sort of production or contribution from a 7th round pick, then that's, again, house money, dude. That's just not expected. And they brought in a guy that I think can compete for reps in that running back room, dude. I mean, coming into the draft, what was their most common draft pick in the 1st round? To me, it was Amarian Hampton. We saw that constantly. One of the biggest positions that people thought they would target. But listen, taking a guy in the 7th round, I mean, that's why we're kind of the mindset that you don't need to draft running back that high, because you can get a guy like Ja'Cory in the 7th round who could become a solid NFL player and contribute, and then you get the luxury of taking Josh Connolly in the 1st round instead of reaching on a running back. So loved that pick, man. Tremendous value.
Yeah, they don't force the running back. You're right. Yeah, that was honestly probably the most common there towards the last few weeks, when after the Chargers signed Najee and he just people stopped having the Chargers draft Omarion. It then resulted in, if he was there at 29, and honestly, Travion Henderson started getting mocked there a good bit too, even if Omarion went before that. So I love the fact they didn't force the running back pick there, because personally, I still think Brian Robinson is a solid running back. In terms of like the drop off compared to other teams that don't have one, I feel like you didn't need to like be that desperate, to upgrade there. But to your point, definitely need the depth and rotational pieces, because Eckler, up there in age, played pretty well last year for all things considered, but having another guy in there to compete and rotate dudes through in Cliff's offense is great. And pairing that with Jalen Lane's speed on the outside, with Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel. So they've got an incredibly interesting offense there in Washington now that looked pretty bleak a few years ago. And they take Kane Medrano, linebacker at UCLA, in the 6th round, incredibly athletic guy. Ran a 4.46 at 6'3", 222. So really athletic, not super productive. He had some decent stats, but one of those guys that's been in college for 6 years, so it's always kind of breakout towards the end. We've seen a lot of those drafted in this class though, because of the COVID year stuff. But a guy that could come in and also start competing for some jobs there. Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner kind of have those locked up, but you need the depth there. Bobby's up there in age. So love that value for him there. I would say one thing I'm surprised that they didn't draft is a tight end. I'm surprised that they didn't add some depth there behind. I know they drafted Ben Sinnott
last
year maybe. So maybe they're just not ready to move on there. But I expected that was one of the sneaky picks for me at the back half of the 1st. Obviously, the tight ends were gone by 14. But in my mind, if when we originally thought Warren would go first and Colston would come after, if Colston was there at 29, I love the value for that. But
yeah, and that's another thing that we saw mocked at times, but that obviously didn't end up playing out.
No.
But I agree, they could have probably taken a tight end. also going back to the running back and offensive line thing, they're also smart enough to know, hey, listen, it doesn't matter what running back you bring into the room. It doesn't matter if you don't have a functioning offensive line.
Yep.
And again, it's just I'm really impressed with how they took this offseason, because a team that just was a game away from the Super Bowl, a fairly close game too, away from making a Super Bowl, dude, you could have easily said, oh man, we're just, we're a player away, or we're a flashy running back pickup away. But no, they said, hey, we need to rebuild this offensive line in a massive way before we go ahead and make a big splash at running back, like drafting a Travion Henderson in the first round. So I thought the process overall for the offseason for the Commanders was fantastic, man.
Yeah, and they are in fascinating position now in a division that is, has the reigning Super Bowl champs that we'll get to, but they look poised to come back really strong in Jane Daniels' second season. They had one intriguing UDFA signing, Ja'Cory Brooks, receiver out of Louisville, who was at Alabama and transferred there. A guy that I think most would say are kind of surprised when undrafted. But they pick him up as a UDFA to bring in to compete for some, another depth piece at wide receiver for that offense. So with that in mind, what would you say is your favorite pick for the Commanders?
I'm gonna go Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in the 7th round, man. I just think
All right.
that dude has a ton of upside for a 7th round pick at a position that, like you said, Brian Robinson is solid, but Austin Eckler's getting old, so they're gonna at least need some depth in the running back room coming up. And I just love taking a guy like that in the 7th round instead of forcing it in the first 2 rounds. So.
Perfect. Yeah. I feel like my consistent thing has always just been the value guys. So I'm gonna go Amos. I love the Connerly pick. It's worth and taking a tackle and not forcing running back or whatever there at the end of the first. But I love the Amos value. He was a guy that started to get mocked, especially to the Bills. They're at 30, who consistently kind of had every corner starting to get mocked to them before Hairston started to gain traction there. So getting him kind of towards the tail end of the 2nd round, I think is just great value for a guy who could come in and immediately work, to get some reps. So love that. If you're new, we look at Renee Bugner, a guy on Twitter, does composite draft score. So he takes basically like 20 of the most known, writers out there, whoever that grade drafts, and he does a composite score to kind of give it like a GPA, and then ranks them. So we've been using that as a reference for each team. Where did the Commanders come in at?
Middle of the pack, which I think says a lot about their draft, man. I think people loved the players they took. They didn't have a lot of picks. And also, I think that's a bad way to grade drafts. We're not grading this year, but if we do in the coming years, then I would like to take into account the fact that they got one of the best left tackles in the NFL with some of this draft capital that they didn't have for this draft. But they came in at 19th. But also, we've said many times, Dakota, on this show, that a lot of these drafts ahead of them are just really good. And a lot of the drafts behind them are just really good. It's just a lot of good drafts this year. And the Commanders are another team that, listen, I think they had a great draft, man. With the few picks that they had, I think they nailed it.
Yeah, I agree. I do think they're getting hurt by just not drafting in volume. It seems like a lot of the classes, again, this is across all these different people that grade. And I think a lot of people just take a lot of value in having more picks. But I think the guys they got are all really interesting pieces to help continue building around their new franchise quarterback. So that is the Commanders 2025 class. Now we'll move on to America's team, the Cowboys, who kind of made a shake at the top of the draft. A guy that started to gain a little bit more traction, going higher than people anticipated with Tyler Booker. They take him 12th overall, a guard in the top 12. What were your thoughts on that, Austin?
Listen, we're going to start with the negative, because I didn't love the Tyler Booker pick to start. But overall, this draft for the Cowboys was great. I have to say that. So don't click off the video, Cowboys fans. You had a great draft. It's just I didn't love the first pick, man. Tyler Booker, first of all, it's a guard at 12, Dakota. And guards at 12, we don't love guards that high. But listen, I'll give them grace on that, because look how the NFL was valuing these interior offensive linemen throughout this draft. All the teams are valuing that high. So we'll take that out of it. But my next biggest problem is he's just not a super clean prospect, man. Like, he's not a
Yeah.
good run blocker. He tested very poorly. He's not a very athletic guy. He has bad movement skills. And so I just like, okay, you're taking a guard at 12, first guard off the board, and he's not a clean prospect. I kind of compare it to the Peter Skoronski pick a couple years ago, Dakota, when the Titans took Skoronski at 11. And
Yep.
even some people then were like, oh, that's a little high to take a projected guard at the next level. But Skoronski, remember, he was a tackle coming out.
Yep.
Some people projected him as a tackle. And he was just a much cleaner prospect, man. Like, he was a better guard prospect than Tyler Booker was. And he was drafted at 11th around the same area. And to be honest, Dakota, I don't even know if that pick's worked out. Just not a
Yeah.
lot of guards high in the draft work. And it's not like Tyler Booker is some elite level prospect and they're trying to replace Zach Martin with Tyler Booker. I mean, listen, you're not replacing Zach Martin with anyone. Martin is a first ballot, no doubt, or Hall of Famer. Listen, it's a risky first round pick, but I get it to a certain degree because like they probably thought we're not getting a starting guard past the first round, past this pick. So from that standpoint, I understand it.
Yeah, and it was clear watching them react, Jerry and Mike and them reacting that, or sorry, Schottenheimer reacting that. They clearly loved Booker and wanted him in there. I agree, from the value of taking a guard at 12 is a little tough, but as you pointed out, 3 tackles went in the top 9. Gray Zabel, Donovan Jackson both come off the board after that. So they probably were, maybe they set the tone by taking him there. But they clearly wanted to get a definitive starting caliber guard, and probably to your point felt if they don't do that here, it's not happening. And one thing I will give Jerry credit for, he gets a lot of flack, but man, the guy has drafted offensive linemen incredibly well. Like they built their entire offensive line themselves through the draft. That has been one of the best one in the NFL for the past few seasons before, Frederick and now Martin, everybody started to retire, or Tyron getting a little bit old. So, I at least trust his process with that. And, he'll obviously be a starter. And he was the consensus, to your point, he still has, those question marks, was the consensus number 1 guard. But they at least walk away with that. So they love building the trench, and Jerry loves that. And he continued that trend.
And
another Tyler.
I love, another Tyler, which is really weird. They have 3 Tylers on the offensive line. But I loved your point, man, because if anyone's going to overdraft an offensive lineman, I trust the Cowboys to do it because they've just hit on this year after year. I mean, you really go back to the Travis Frederick days when they drafted him high, or Zach Martin when they drafted him high. I mean, they just hit on these guys consistently. So I get it. Like, they believe in their process, and if they think Tyler Booker's the guy, then I get that. But the reports were that they were debating him and Walter Nolan.
Yes.
Pretty heavily, which is fascinating because if you told me you came away with Walter Nolan, Donovan Ezeraku, and Siobhan Revel in the 3rd round, I would love that even more, man. I love these next 2 picks they had. But I mean, I would have personally taken Walter Nolan over Tyler Booker just because I just think he's a better prospect at his position. But again, Cowboys, I get it. You're great at taking offensive linemen. You took another offensive lineman to start. See how it works out.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I personally just loved Walter Nolan. I mocked him in our official mock 11 to the 49ers in the What We Do one, so loved him as a prospect. Loved the interior pass rush. And to your point, what they ended up with their defense would be looking pretty scary right now, and it still does. They still got 2 really good guys, and it's also another one like the Browns where if you just shuffle the order slightly, then you're feeling absolutely fantastic about the class. Not to say that it's still not a really good one, but just the order they came in. They then take a guy who slipped to the 2nd in Donovan Ezeraku, edge out of Boston College, who is an absolute dog. So they grab him in the 2nd, and I absolutely love the pairing of him with Michael Parsons. To have 2 absolute monsters coming off of the edge. And then to your point, Siobhan Revel, corner out of East Carolina, who got hurt this past season, like a lot of these guys, but was an absolute stud, and another guy who people were projecting to at least, at the very minimum, go in the 2nd round, and was a fantastic athlete, And the Cowboys had the breakout from Deron Bland, and then Trayvon was dealing with injuries, so they definitely need the help in the secondary. So adding those two pieces to that defense were fantastic.
Yeah, man. I mean, to me, like we said this a couple episodes Dakota ago, but they got 3 first-round talents. I mean, that's a fact, dude. I mean, all 3 of their first picks were mocked in the first round at some point. I mean, Donovan Ezeraku, I thought for sure would go in the first round with all the
Yeah,
question marks that these other edge rushers had. Like Donovan
yeah,
Ezeraku really didn't have many question marks other than he's not the best run defender. But I mean that doesn't stop teams taking chances on edges. But he had a 90.7 pass rush grade for PFF this past season, 25.8 pass rush win rate. Fantastic numbers, man. I mean, he is a really, really good pass rusher. And listen, I thought like he was one of the safest prospects, man. I thought, I could have seen him. This is crazy to say. I could have seen him going 9 to the Saints, dude. Like that was like a real possibility for me. And some of the mocks I did. So listen, getting him at 44, absolutely a phenomenal value. And like you just touched on, Dakota, pairing him with Micah Parsons, man. I mean, and that's why I was intrigued by. Okay, if you also got Walter Nolan, then it's like, oh my Lord,
yeah.
this defensive line is just terrifying. Like, who are you going to block on this defensive line? So yeah, dude, love that pick. And then the Revel pick, dude. I mean, like one of the higher upside corners in the entire draft. And like the Cowboys, we just talked about how they're good at evaluating offensive line. They've been pretty solid at evaluating corner as well, dude. I mean, they've hit on some corners drafted outside the first round, which is really not
Yep.
very typical. So I think Revel's another guy that they could come away with saying, hey, we got another super solid starting NFL cornerback in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I remember back when Trayvon fell to the second. That the I was as a Titans fan, I would have been happy if we drafted him in the first that year when he came out. Another tall corner too, 6'2", adding that length on the outside. Love that for them. And high athlete. So yeah, adding more pieces to that defense that can make an impact really early on. To a defense that honestly took a pretty massive step back last season. Obviously, injuries plagued the Cowboys last year pretty heavily, so the season was almost felt like a wash. But the defense took a step back. Run defense, particularly early on, was pretty atrocious, which is another reason where Walter Nolan would have been an interesting fit. He's more of a pass rusher, but still adding to that defensive line. But still love those picks. And then, they add Jaden Blue, running back out of Texas, who has been stuck behind some of Texas's really good running backs over the past few seasons, with Jonathan Brooks for the past couple. 4.38 speed. Doesn't have a ton of production. Had a little bit of a fumbling issue, but had the ability to force some missed tackles, though. So kind of a dynamic weapon potentially for them out of the backfield there in the 5th round.
Yeah, man, it's interesting, dude. Just looking at our lands, he is listed as RB number 2 right now for Dallas. That's interesting, dude. Like they're kind of sticking to this fact that I don't know, maybe Jerry got so burned by the Zeke contract that held him down for so long that he's like, dude, we're putting absolutely no investment into this position anymore. But they got Javonte Williams. He's currently listed as the starter. Well, Javonte Williams has been injury prone. So Dallas fans, don't be surprised if Jaden Blue's RB number 1 come week 2 or 3. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. And maybe they still go target a guy. I mean, I don't know like who's necessarily out and available, and I don't see them making a trade for running back. So listen, Jaden Blue in the 5th round, does he have some question marks? He does, but he's going to contribute to this team one way or another because they just don't have the depth at that position. And, to maybe sound like a hypocrite here, we just got done talking about how we don't like a lot of investment in the running back position. But I feel like this is kind of, they're making a strong statement. Like, we just don't care. Like, we're just not going to get a starting caliber guy. So who knows? We'll see how that works out. But Jaden Blue could be RB1 before long.
Yeah, it's interesting to know if Chavon, like with Ezeraku falling and then with Revel falling, like would they have gone running back earlier if it wasn't for the fact they're sitting there like how are these dudes on the board? And they do double up. They take Phil Maffa, running back out of Clemson in the 7th, who is like the opposite of Jaden Blue. He is big power back. He's like what 6'1", 234. So completely
Bruiser.
different body. Yeah. So the more the bruiser, and then you got Blue, who's more of the, a little bit more agile, versatile running back. You can use him out of the backfield a bit more. So don't heavily invest in running back like people kept projecting them to, in terms of the value at the top of the draft, but they do double up, get a couple guys in there, as we know, and we just talked about with Jacory as well. Like, these dudes could end up being starters in the NFL. That happens all the time. A lot of running backs in the NFL are guys drafted in the third or later. So love them doubling up with how many picks they had. They had the capital to do it. A couple of the picks, take Shamar James, linebacker out of Florida, who is, not super productive, not super athletic, 6'1", 222, pretty, standard, typical. Ajani Cornelius, some more tackle depth to come in and compete. They did take a defensive tackle out of UCLA, so they did add to the front. Kind of surprised they didn't. They didn't take another, but from Maryland in the 7th. So kind of surprised they didn't invest in the interior of the defensive line a bit more earlier. They did, they didn't really have. They did get there. They picked up Solomon Thomas, so they did pick up one person. That's not a great signing. They did get Osa re-signed, so that was their their main thing. And they still have Mozzie Smith, so maybe it was a little overblown, but I think pass rush specifically and Osa sticking around was helpful for that. But really need some development out of Mozzie.
Exactly, because they're still
drafted that late.
Yeah, no doubt, and they're still lacking that run defense. I mean, you just talked about how the run defense was so poor last year, and it has been what it feels like for a couple years now. That's why they drafted Mozzie Smith, to fix that run defense, and it just hasn't happened. So who knows? Well, that's kind of still up in the air. But listen, I like you could have forced a defensive interior earlier or running back like we were just talking about. But the two guys they got in the second and third round, I think part of that, they are positions I need, but you could also argue those were best player available in those spots. So I really loved what they did with their first 3 picks. I think overall their draft was fine. My biggest problem with Jerry and their process is the work they do in free agency, or the lack thereof of work they do in the free agency. They just don't believe in filling needs in free agency, man. And I think that could have avoided a lot of these problems. Like, you go fill a guard need in free agency, well, then all of a sudden you don't have to force the Tyler Booker pick. Or if you go get a Najee Harris in free agency, so all of a sudden you have a viable NFL starting running back. Now, they signed Javonte Williams, but I just wouldn't trust Javonte Williams as of right now, just because he's a good player, but he's been hurt the majority of his career. So I think the Cowboys draft really well, and they did so this year, but they need to focus on filling some of these gaps on their team in free agency when you have the ability to do so.
Yeah, they are a team with the capital to spend, as from just an ownership perspective, when it comes to signing bonuses and things like that play into where players want to go. And they're a big market, so people want to be in Dallas. With all the memeing and joking that goes on with the Cowboys, they're still a place people want to be, and they're one of the most valuable sports franchises in the world. I also found out, I knew Kaiir Elam got traded and forgot it was the Cowboys. So that's where he's at. So, he's not on Buffalo's roster. They trade from taking a shot on a younger guy who hasn't panned out very well. But to your point, just looking at like the free agents they picked up, they traded for numerous people. They traded for Milton. They traded for Kenneth Murray with the Titans, and then traded for Kaiir Elam. So it's just nobody stands out as like a big signing, which you think the Cowboys, and Jerry just never does it. To your point, he does not fill needs to free agency, but they have the ability to do it, and I'm surprised. And just looking at the roster, it makes me just, a little annoyed, because I'm like, you guys could be a little bit better if you just put a little bit more effort into that. And they got Miles Sanders as another one of the ones that like a running, and it's like that dude is on his way out. He's done.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
a lot of these dudes are talking about they're trading for and everything. Like, a lot of these dudes might not even be on the roster. I love trading for Joe Milton, because Joe Milton, great developmental quarterback, whatever. But a lot of these dudes, I mean, Elam might not even make the team. I'm not sure. So yeah, man. Again, they had a great draft. They came around with 3 first-round picks. In my opinion, 3 first-round talents in one single draft is fantastic. It's just some of the ordering was a little bit weird, especially with taking Tyler Booker. And you just kind of avoid that, like we're saying, if you focus on filling that need in free agency. I mean, it wasn't a massive free agent year, like as far as depth is concerned and everything like that. But
Right.
there was starting guards that you could go out and get and fill that Zach Martin gap without forcing Tyler Booker at 12 overall.
Yeah, and I agree. I do like the draft overall. But again, the whole drafting for need thing, never a big fan of it. Luckily, the board worked out pretty well for them. And they add depth at important positions like along the defensive line and at tackle. So, and they also major signing that stands out from a free agent or UDFA, undrafted free agent perspective is Trayshawn Holden. So the other receiver, so it's Tez Johnson from Oregon and then Trayshawn Holden. So that's a pretty solid signing. A guy that could work his way on to, one thing we didn't talk about, which stands out, is they didn't draft a receiver.
Yeah,
That's one thing that really surprised me. They traded for Mingo, still young, but just really hasn't shown a ton. They they actually signed. I'll be shocked if he makes the roster. They signed your boy Paris Campbell is currently on the roster. That's not usually what you want.
no, not at all.
So surprised they didn't invest more in receiver other than just UDFAs would be my biggest surprise with the class in general.
Yeah, and that is an interesting topic because I do kind of wonder if T Mac was there, what
Yeah.
that decision would have been. We'll never know because the Panthers took him at 8, but would have been fascinating if they came away with T Mac with the other haul they got, dude. That would
Ugh,
honestly, if
him
they
and
did
CD.
that, that would have been my favorite draft in the NFL. So, yeah, dude. But like I agree that there needs to be more investment in receiver number 2, because dude, and I don't want to wish this on him because he's one of the best receivers in the league, and I'm definitely don't want this to happen. It's just if CD Lamb goes down with an injury, all of a sudden this is the worst receiving core in the NFL.
Literally.
So, like, you're one CD Lamb injury away from having literally the worst position group in the entire league. So,
Which is never what you want to be.
no.
And again, all those scenarios of even some of the guys that went the second, though, of pairing some of these guys with CD Lamb, you just start to be like, that suddenly becomes one of the best duos in the NFL because CD is so good. But overall, still a solid draft from them. They need to address that wide receiver too still. We'll be curious to see what happens with them this year after Dak coming back and beefing up the O-line a little bit more. Be curious to see what the Cowboys do this season. What did Renee Bugner's composite score say about the Cowboys?
They had a phenomenal draft according to the graders, and I agree. I agree with the graders. I think they did have a phenomenal draft. They ranked number 7 overall in the NFL, and I think it just speaks to, listen, you literally got 3 dudes who were projected first round players at any given points with your first 3 picks. So despite the potential reach on Tyler Booker, now Tyler Booker could end up being a great player, but I think as far as the consensus is concerned, he was a reach. Despite that, you still came around in the second and third and got 2 of the biggest values in the draft. So you kind of made up for it in a way, as a whole. So yeah, 7th overall in the NFL, which I don't necessarily disagree with.
Yeah, and that is really solid. So feeling pretty good, Cowboys fans, going into 2025. So that is the Cowboys 2025 class. And now we'll move on to the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Philadelphia
Correct.
Eagles. Howie does it again, even though by his own accord, it tried not to let it happen.
Yeah.
Because they take Jihad Campbell. They trade at one spot with the Chiefs to take Jihad Campbell, who they were apparently trying to go as high as 22 with the Chargers and thought they even had like a deal done to move up to take him there. But he falls all the way and they move up just to one spot to guarantee, just to clarify that. Like, they're not like the Chiefs aren't saying, hey, if you don't trade, we're taking him. It's just they want to definitively guarantee they get him. So they move up that one spot so nobody else can. But yeah, they walk away with the best pure linebacker prospect in the class.
Also heard a kind of a fascinating take on that too, is since Howie, dude, the reports were Howie's trying to trade up for Jihad Campbell all the way up to like 22 with like the Chargers, I believe, as early as the Chargers. So he was willing to give up like an extra 3rd round pick, maybe even 2 3rd round picks to get up that high. And so at the point where it got down to the Chiefs and them, he, like, giving up a 5th was like nothing to him because he was already willing to give up all these other picks. So what does a fifth matter? It's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll just go ahead and do this. And those conversations are interesting, Dakota. We have talked about this a lot. I wish we could be in those war rooms, or at least get video footage of these war rooms when the conversations are happening, especially with trades, because apparently the conversation with the Chiefs, which they're a rivalry at some point, right? I mean, they played each other in 2 Super Bowls now. Like, this is a
Yep.
legitimate competitor of theirs. It's not like a division rival, but I mean, it's Super Bowl rival. There's no bigger rivalry than that. So they're on the phone. It's like, okay, so how does this conversation go? Because of course the Eagles aren't going to tell them who they're picking, and the Chiefs aren't going to tell them who they want. So apparently it came down to, they basically asked offense or defense. And when they said defense, they're like, okay, the Chiefs are fine with trading back. But also, people made the points like, well, if they knew they weren't taking their guy, why would Howie make the trade at that point? Because it's like, you know what I'm saying? But that's to your point. It's like, you're also trying to make sure nobody else is going to trade up with the Chiefs and go get them as well. So, but dude, overall, listen, if they're going to play Jahad Campbell off the ball linebacker, this is a phenomenal pick, dude. I mean, like, people thought he was a top 10 player. There were several, like, for the longest time on NFL Network show on DJ's rankings, like, he was the highest rated player, because it's like, dude, like, everyone else is gone. Jahad Campbell's the best player available. And Dakota, you made one of the best points I heard during the offseason, which is, it feels great when you come away with the best player at a position in the draft. And that's what they did. I mean, they got the best player at off the ball linebacker in the entire draft at a really weak linebacker class, dude. It's just not a strong linebacker class. So if they plan to play him at off the ball linebacker, which that's kind of debate that we'll get into, if they plan to play him at off the ball linebacker, it's a phenomenal pick.
Yeah, and he really is, the value of him there. Like, personally, we don't disagree that he is a top 10 player in this draft. Personally, just don't love taking linebackers that high. But once you're sitting at 31 or 32, the value there is absurd. To be a defending Super Bowl champs and walk away with the best player at a position has to feel insane. And he's athletic, he's productive, he's good in coverage. He's a true 3-down sideline to sideline linebacker who has phenomenal pass rushing skills. And to your point, there's been rumblings on whether they plan to play him inside or off the edge. And I agree, he's a great pass rusher, but playing off the edge is not necessarily his strong suit. Pass rushing and edge rushing are just 2 very different things. And Howie kind of had, I'll read the quote that he had, a bit of a, keeping it a bit vague, which I think could also just be due to wanting to hide the way you're going to use him. You don't really want to show your hand, so it makes sense. But, they basically just asked him bluntly, is he going to be an edge rusher or off-ball linebacker? And he says, we view him as a front 7 player who's got incredible versatility and a skill set to do both of those things, which is true. But to your, what you just kind of noted, I think it would be a mistake, in my opinion, to just try to make him purely play edge when his skill set is fantastic as an inside linebacker who can pass rush and blitz, and you can move him around and let him rush the passer from wherever.
Exactly, dude. I think he's much more valuable from that point of view. And also, if you're gonna move him to edge, and that's why, because listen, we just talked about how we don't value drafting linebacker that highly, and Howie Roseman's a pretty smart guy. I feel like he also wouldn't value taking or trading up for a linebacker, giving up 3rd round picks. So maybe the plan is to move him to edge. And if that's the case, man, I don't love it, because not only because he's better suited to play off ball linebacker, but also there's better edge rushers on the board. I mean, Donovan Ezra-Cruz right there. We just got done talking about him. Mike Green was still on the board with all his question marks or whatever. Landon Jackson's there. Like, I can go on and on. There was more established edge rushers there if you specifically wanted to target edge. Now I don't think that's what they are doing. Ultimately, I think they are hoping he's a versatile player, and that hasn't worked historically as far as like guys that don't have a set position. But it is intriguing. Like, it's very intriguing, and he does have an interesting skill set, because like you said, he's really good at rushing the passer, but not on the edge, right? It's difference between blitzing and rushing off the edge. Big difference. So yeah, overall though, dude, great value where they got him, because I felt like when they took him, this was best player available. Like, that's how I felt about it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not how we felt about it, but But dude, listen, you have probably the most loaded roster in the NFL, and you can afford to take a guy who's not gonna be seen as a starter, right? They just signed Zach Bond. They have N'Kobe Dean, who has honestly started to break out, and like so they're pretty set at off ball linebacker. But you're the Eagles. You don't have to draft for need, and that's what makes you the best team in the NFL, right? That's what makes you defending Super Bowl champions when you don't force need picks in the draft. You just take the best player available.
I think they're the first team, as we've gone through these, where they don't have a rookie projected to start on our lads.
Yep.
He's projected to be back up to N'Kobe, but he provides a different skill set than both of them. Like we talked about, the pass rushing ability means that you can plug him in pass rushing situations. He can drop back in coverage. He can rush the passer. He could do whatever you need him to. So it gives you more tools to play with. And to your point, with a roster that is so deep already, this is how you future proof it as well. You just add depth pieces that are fantastic players who will now step up at some point. You can use them here or there, but at one day they're going to take over the reins. And N'Kobe has had injuries at times as well, so you need depth there for if N'Kobe gets hurt again. I love the value there. We'll see what they end up doing with him. But I think Howie's I think he's playing with smoke a little bit there. I think he's trying to hide his hand on what we'll see out of Jihad. But and then shockingly, he's not projected to start, but they take Andrew Makuba, safety out of Texas in the second, who kind of has the ability to potentially get in and start at safety. I've got Sidney Brown and Reed Blankenship currently projected as their two safeties, but Makuba has the ability to go in there and compete for one of those jobs pretty early on.
Yeah, man, he's a great player. Forced an incompletion on 26.1% of targets in college. Also had a 90 overall grade in 2024. Really productive safety, man. And again, I'll reiterate, dude, when you have such a loaded roster, you have the luxury of doing something like this when you don't need a safety. You didn't need an off-ball linebacker, but you can take them. You can take who you believe is the best player available or fits your scheme because you have such a loaded roster that you don't desperately need to go fill a guard hole, or you don't desperately need to go fill a tight end hole like the Colts did. I'll just throw a shot at my own team. Like you don't desperately need to go do those things because you don't have any holes on the team. And you're right, dude. He could be a contributor at some point. Doesn't have to be right away, which is what
Exactly.
you really love. That's ideal for a second round pick. You don't want your second round pick to have to go immediately play because there's a huge transition from going to college ball to the NFL. So I think again, great pick for them, great depth piece, and great player.
And we use the word compete a lot, and I think that's the scenarios that you love is when you have a guy that can just go compete for a job. You don't need him to be the guy that takes that job, but you want to add pieces that are compete. You want competition every day in practice like that, and guys who are fighting. To coaches say those cliche things a lot, like the depth chart is set every week based on how people practice and things like that. So the Eagles have gotten where they're at from consistently doing that, drafting guys, adding depth, adding competition, and then letting those guys earn those spots. So they continue to do it. And they drafted volume as well. Defending champs drafting 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 times. A lot of that is in the fourth and later. But still, potential guys to come in and add depth at those positions. They take Ty Robinson, the D tackle out of Nebraska. Pretty athletic guy. 6'5", 288, 4'8", 340. Pretty fast, pretty athletic. People kind of expected him to add a little bit of depth to the D-line after losing Milton Williams. They still have the two Georgia guys, but they love to rotate. And Milton kind of broke out this past season and then goes and gets a huge contract. So what do? You add more depth and you rinse, recycle, repeat. You add guys in there and then you just continue building it.
Agree, man. And listen, you just talk about drafting and volume. Love it, dude. More at-bats, more chances to hit. That's just how this game works, dude. That's how the good teams play it, man. It's how the Ravens do it. It's how the Eagles do it. Some of the best teams in the NFL take this approach, which is, yeah, we have a loaded roster. And listen, some of these guys might not even make the Eagles 53 this year, but it's more at bats, man. You get more chances to hit on guys. And I don't know who's hit on late round picks like Howie Roseman out of any GM in the NFL. I mean, he just does that at such a consistent rate. So compared to everyone else, that is. And another pick I liked there is Kyle McCord in the 6th. Listen, I out of the developmental quarterbacks in this class, Kyle McCord was one of the most fascinating to me. I felt like his tools were just better than a lot of the other quarterbacks in this class. And when we're talking about developmental guys in the 6th round, I almost would rather go for the toolsy guy that wasn't always super consistent. Although he was really good his last year at Syracuse, man. It would have been interesting. We'll never know this. It would have been interesting if Ohio State decided to roll with McCord for one more year. Obviously, worked out for them. They got Will Howard. They went on to win a national championship. But I'm not convinced that McCord couldn't have done the exact same thing in that offense, to be honest with you. And I also love the Eagles' process with this, man. They are literally the poster child for taking developmental QBs. They constantly do it. It seems like they take a developmental QB every draft. And listen, just go back now. This isn't the same because he was a 2nd round pick compared to a 6th round pick. But dude, when they took Jalen Hurts in the 2020 draft, Carson Wentz was still the guy. Like Carson Wentz was still the guy. Seemed like he was still the franchise quarterback.
Yeah.
But it ended up being Hurts, and it ended up being Hurts that led him to the Super Bowl. So, you gotta keep those kind of things in mind, man. You never know when it's gonna end. Like, I'm not saying Jalen Hurts' career is about to be over, but you just never know. You just never know, dude. So I love taking chances on developmental guys in the 6th.
Yeah, those videos circulated after the draft again of people reacting to their picks that were where they were like, "What was this?" And it's ones that aged horribly. And there was one that was the Eagles one, where they draft Jalen Hurts, and all these fans are like, "What is the worst pick ever?" And now here they are, and he's won you a Super Bowl. So
exactly,
I agree. They took Tanner McKee a couple years ago, and he's played a little bit, and honestly didn't look bad. And adding Kyle McCord to the quarterback room, I think they signed traded for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. But to be honest, he could be the odd man out there because to me, he's just never looked that good in the times he's gotten to play. So we'll see what happens in the competition. But I agree, adding Kyle McCord, a more of all the QBs, we talk about athleticism these days. He's probably one of the least athletic, more of just pocket passer, get the ball out, throw the ball, which is a little bit different too than what Jalen does. And it's interesting because Tanner's kind of the same way. So they always have their backups be a little bit of a different skill set than what Jalen Hurts does. But I think that's good value for a guy that was kind of projected to go higher than that as well. Again, most of these QBs kind of fell. And then add a ton of depth at other positions. We won't dive into these guys too much, but Mac McWilliams, who I think a lot of people were pretty high on, corner out of UCF as a guy that can come in, compete. Again, athletic dude. They drafted a lot of athletic guys, which you have the luxury of doing when you're like the Eagles as well, where your roster is already really deep. You can take a little bit more shots on these more athletic guys in the later rounds and hope they pan out because you're not as reliant on them needing to play early. So linebacker, Smell Martin Jr., high athlete, 4.58 dude. Drew Kendall, athletic as well, center, that can come in and add some depth there. Yeah, a theme. You draft, except for Kyle McCord, but he's the quarterback. You don't need him to be as athletic.
Well, and even though he's not athletic, he had one of the biggest arms in the class, so he still has that
he's got a cannon
upside in a way. So yeah, I mean that's the kind of the theme of this draft. They took a lot of upside guys outside of, which again, when you're in the 6th round, you're in the 5th round. Right. That's what you want, dude. You want to take big swings, and a lot of time on a big swing you'll strike out, but sometimes you hit a home run. A big swing they took a couple years ago, Jordan Mailata, 6th round pick, 7th round pick on a left tackle, developmental left tackle, and it ended up being the best left tackle in the NFL potentially. So another guy I like too, Cameron Williams in the 6th. I think he has a decent amount of upside. And listen, with this article mentions it, Lane Johnson's getting older. They need to start thinking about replacing Lane Johnson at tackle. He's still great. He's still at a high level. Don't get me wrong. He can still play. It's just, listen, a lot of those guys from that 13, I believe, class are starting to retire,
Yep.
starting to leave the NFL.
One of the only good players from that class. Yeah.
Exactly. And Teron Armstead was another guy that was a good player from that class, literally just retired. So dudes from that class are going. So you have to start thinking about that. And again, I just mentioned Mailata as a late pick. Like, Howie Roseman loves hitting on offensive linemen in these late rounds, man. He's really, really good at it. So who knows, maybe Cameron Williams is that next guy he hits in the late rounds.
Yeah, and then pairing him with Miles Hinton, tackle out of Michigan, two behemoths as well. 6'7" and 6'8", or sorry, 6'7" and 6'6". And I think Jordan Mailata is 6'8". So adding absolute demons to the tackles, to those that depth chart there is what Howie likes to do. Put those huge dudes in there and let them play. So, and then last pick's Antoine Powell-Ryland, which again comes back to something of adding depth at edge, something that Howie's always going to do. So overall, just feels like another really solid class from them. UDFA wise, no names stood out massive to me. Montrell Johnson, running back from Florida. Some of these SEC guys we're a bit more in the know with personally, just because of having to play against them typically. But that's the main name that stood out to me. And then Kyman Rucker actually is a minicamp invite, the edge from North Carolina. I feel like he had gotten hyped up a couple years ago when he was younger. So adding a few more guys in there to compete. With that in mind, what was your favorite pick?
Well, listen, I love the Jawad Campbell pick, but I'll kind of leave that one for you, or if you want to go a different direction as well. But I'm going to go Kyle McCord. I just think, Kyle McCord will likely never play snap for the Eagles, but I just love the process of taking developmental QBs, even though you're, quote, set at the position. They thought they were set at the position with Carson Wentz. That's why you got the reaction that you got from some of those Eagles fans. It's like, well, we don't need a quarterback. Why are we taking Jalen Hurts, this unknown prospect or whatever? It's like, well, because it's fluid, man. It's a fluid situation. And even if Kyle McCord, kind of like we saw with Joe Milton, right? Last year with the Patriots, you take Drake May early, then you take Joe Milton late. Well, Joe Milton has shown so much in the preseason. Look what they did. They ended up flipping him for more draft capital. That's always a possibility as well. Some of these rookies show, potential in training camp and then into the preseason. And some team likes to take a shot on a guy like that. So that adds some value as well. I just think it's a good process, man. So I'll go Kyle McCord.
Love it. I will. I think it's the first one I've done it, but I'm going to go Jihad Campbell, the first round pick. I think just letting the board moving up. I don't care if they gave up a fifth, whatever they gave up. I think it was a fifth to move up.
It was.
They had capital. Didn't matter. They still finished with 3 fifth-round picks. So, but taking the best linebacker prospect in this class as the defending Super Bowl champs just feels ridiculously good for them. So love that. With that in mind, what was Renee Bugner? What was the composite score for the Eagles class?
Really good draft class for them, according to the consensus. 5th overall draft class in the NFL. The rich get richer, as they say, the defending Super Bowl champions. But listen, it's not surprising. That's why these good teams are good, man. They have good draft process, and the Eagles have good draft process year in, year out.
Love it. And I think I agree with it. So that is the Eagles 2025 class. Before we go to the Giants, I think I messed this up a little bit. I don't know if we did a favorite player for the Cowboys.
Oh, did we not? All right.
I don't think we did a favorite player. Yeah. Who's your favorite for the Cowboys? We'll backpedal slightly here.
I'll go Donovan Ezeraku for the Cowboys in the second round. We'll add that to the Cowboys video. Donovan Ezeraku, loved hit that value there. I thought potential top 10 player, maybe. Like if some like teams didn't believe in the edge, like all the edge questions, all the off-field questions with some of the edge rushers. So yeah, Donovan Ezeraku in the second round, fantastic value for the Cowboys.
Same note, Siobhan Rebel, 3rd round, another dude that could have gone at the late first. These corners dropping, love the length, love having that depth to their cornerback room, and a piece that again could be a starter in the 3rd round, which you always love that value. So cool. So we will now jump into the New York Giants.
The G-Men.
So the New York football giant G-Men. They do the chalk thing at 3, which I think was good process. They take Abdul Carter at number 3 overall, and then make the big splash by trading back into the 1st round which started to gain a lot of steam, both from the Jackson Dart hype with the Saints and everything with him, and also just the steam that somebody was going to trade back into the first for a quarterback. Started thinking it was going to be Dart leading up to the draft. Shedeur stuff still seemed likely at that time. But they take Abdul Carter at 3, and then Jackson Dart trading up to 25 to take their potential franchise quarterback.
Yeah, good process in the first round, like you said. Can't give them too much credit for taking Abdul Carter just because I think just about every team in the NFL would have taken that pick, but they did the right thing. They could have reached on quarterback. I mean, we've seen this happen before. They reached on Daniel Jones a few years ago in 2019. So teams have done it before. But Abdul Carter was absolutely the correct pick. I mean, he could end up being the best player in this entire draft class. That's definitely on the table for him. You also pair him with the rest of that defensive line, which is now looking absolutely terrifying. I mean, you have Brian Burns coming off the other edge. You have Dexter Lawrence in the interior as the best nose tackle in the NFL. And you also have Kayvon Thibodeau, who is now your third edge rusher. And listen, Kayvon Thibodeau as the number one guy, I don't love because he hasn't really panned out as a top 10 pick. But as your third edge rusher, now all of a sudden I love that. It's like that's insanely good depth. And who knows if they ended up like signing him long term. I don't think they will. But as far as next season is concerned, I mean, this defensive line is now looking like one of the best in the league. And I don't know how many like position groups as of recent for the Giants have been arguably one of the best in the league. I mean, they just really haven't had that kind of roster, but you add a guy like Abdul Carter. And also I'll jump ahead a little bit and talk about Darius Alexander in the third round. You add Darius Alexander in the interior in the third round. Now, all of a sudden, this defensive line for the Giants is looking absolutely phenomenal, man.
Yeah, literally could. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to even say it looks like the best defensive line in the NFL.
It's really not. It's not a stretch.
I mean, and easily, yeah, exactly. Easily arguable because, Darius Alexander is another guy that kind of dropped in terms of the value, was gaining a little bit of hype to go in the first by some people, but definitely a surprise to see him fall all the way from the second. So them grabbing him at the top of the third, pairing that with Abdul Carter, and to your point, I envision he's going to end up being the number 2. To Brian Burns, and then letting Kayvon kind of be more situational. And he's also a little bit, decent run defender, just not great pass rush. So maybe you use Abdul to coming off the edge more in the passing situations to begin his career. You have more versatility to play with there, but a defensive line that just looks absolutely terrifying now. So love the pick of Carter, and then love that pick of Darius Alexander at the top of the third. And now we got to talk quarterback. Yep. Jackson Dart is the second quarterback off the board. I think most people probably 8 hours before the draft, where the Dart hype really started to grow, still expected Shedeur to be the second one off the board. But things officially start his plummet. But they jump up to grab Ole Miss's quarterback, Jackson Dart, to potentially be their guy.
Listen, man. Didn't love Dart as a prospect. I'll start off by saying that, but I love the process. The Giants are without a franchise quarterback. They signed 2 bridge quarterbacks in the offseason, and Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, which again, when you don't have a guy, I think signing a bridge guy is a good process. And we have to add the context, and Giants fans are fully aware of this. Their coach and their GM are currently fighting for their job. As far as hot seats are concerned, they are some of the hotter seats in the NFL. They are fighting for the job this season, and I don't know if it just means like guaranteed if they have a losing season, they're out. But going forward, I think they've built a solid nucleus here. And as far as Jackson Dart's concerned, they give up 2 third-round picks. But listen, to trade back up to the first round, but you're going for a quarterback, so it kind of changes the math a little bit. Like, because if Jackson Dart even becomes a solid starting quarterback, then all of a sudden the 2 third-round picks are completely pointless, man. It doesn't matter at all. Now, if he becomes and I don't even know if this is in his range of outcomes, but it's possible. Maybe it's like a 1% chance. But if he becomes an elite quarterback, then it's like, dude, then you just hit the steal of the draft. I mean, it could literally be the steal of the draft. But this isn't like, that's not his projection, obviously. I mean, like you just mentioned, Dakota, many people still expected Shedeur Sanders to be the second quarterback off the board. And that is an interesting story, right? Because it seemed like the Giants were on Shedeur. Like they seemed like they were interested in Shedeur all the way through the process until
Yep.
the interviews happened. And apparently the report is that Dayball gave him like homework, Shadur Sanders homework, and Shadur Sanders didn't do the homework, and Dayball was pissed about that, and Shadur was pissed that Dayball was pissed about it. And that's all she wrote, man. And listen, I'm on the Giants side in that, man. I am, because like when you're a guy like Shadur Sanders who isn't the cleanest prospect in the world, you need to do your homework. Like you need to do what they assign you. So I get why they ended up going with Jackson Dart instead. Just from because listen, like that those intangibles matter to a certain extent, dude. They really do. Especially when we're talking about the most important position. It's the quarterback position, man. I talk about this a lot on this show and will continue to. It's looked at differently, man, as far as leadership and things like that are concerned. So they probably liked a little bit more of those intangibles in Dart. And he was productive in college, man. It's just a question of
Yep.
that Ole Miss offense. How will that Ole Miss offense translate to the NFL?
Yeah, you really nailed it on the head there. And we've talked about a lot where the parts that we don't see play almost an even bigger role with those interviews. And the details kind of trickle out afterwards. And I mean, it's such a believable thing because of the fact that Shooter fell as far as he did, that it sounds like he just rubbed a lot of teams the wrong way. And I completely respect, I think we can both think that 5th round value for him after that is solid, but also completely understand the Giants not wanting to draft him after that. Like, I wouldn't be a fan of the guy either. So they go with Dart instead. And I also agree, giving up 2/3 to move back into the first. I love that. The value of having a quarterback on a rookie deal in the first round is also incredibly valuable because you get the 5th-year option. You get an extra year essentially of being able to have them. And there's just more flexibility there. That's what the Ravens did when they traded back just to pick 32 to get Lamar, in 2018. So I love that process there. And they went and got the guy they wanted. And Dart is an interesting prospect because your point, like we share this as Tennessee fans, as Vols fans. Our offense is probably the worst to project to the NFL, and then Ole Miss's is probably the one after that. It's a little bit more complex than Tennessee's, at least from like a matching to the NFL perspective. But it's still pretty tough to project. So you have to take that in line with also not necessarily elite tape, where he didn't necessarily show anything super elite. One thing that I think I would give him credit for is that he's a pretty quick decision maker. Like that's one thing that can, with honestly comparing what Shadur does, where he does the like ball pat thing and stuff, like I think that's sometimes a sense of like hesitancy. And Dart doesn't really have that. Like when he sees, he usually just lets it rip. Now, whether it's accurate or whatnot, different question, but like he at least has that processing time where when he sees it develop, he gets it out. So that's something you like, where you could also probably argue that Daniel Jones wasn't necessarily the best at that. So to go in a different direction there probably feels pretty good. But yeah, an interesting guy. He's got athleticism. He can scramble a bit. He's not the best at truly like evading in the pocket. He can get himself into trouble sometimes. But he's good, if he can get out and escape, he can pick up some yards on the ground, which is pretty standard for today's quarterbacks. Not quite the athlete. Daniel Jones gets a lot of rap, but like he is honestly a fantastic athlete. So not that level, but yeah, I mean, he's inconsistent on tape, but like it's again, you project it, you don't know what he'll be because of the Ole Miss thing as well. So, but all that to say, especially hearing how many other teams were so high on him, I think the value of giving up 2/3 to get that extra year, potentially 2 on the contract, and seeing what he is, I think it's worth it. Where you're in a position where you need a quarterback.
Totally agree, dude. And another interesting kind of X factor in all of this is Brian Dayball was a massive part of Josh Allen's development. Now, not comparing Josh Allen to Jackson Dart in any way, shape, or form, because they're completely different players coming out, like polar opposite players, to be completely honest with you. However, Brian Dayball really hasn't gotten the opportunity to develop a rookie quarterback since he's been the head coach of the Giants. It's really been Daniel Jones, and they inherited Daniel Jones. Now, their mistake was signing him to the deal. They were a part of that. That was a huge mistake. But that is going to be interesting, dude, because Brian Dayball has kind of, it seems like despite the Giants being terrible, he's done a lot with a little, I would say, or he's made good work with what he's been given as a Giants head coach, and as an offensive guru. So we'll kind of see how that works out. Unfortunately, they're in such a tough spot, man, which is kind of part of this that kind of goes under the radar. they might not even get to see the fruits of their labor with Jackson Dart, because like if they just aren't in a position to win next year, which I don't think they will be with Russell Wilson at quarterback. I just don't think that, and I think that's fair to say. Like Russell Wilson is just not, that caliber quarterback anymore. So, if they never, like if they lose, 12 games next year and they get fired, Jackson Dart could still end up being good down the line, man, but they'll never know, because it's just like they're at the end of the line here. They kind of need to get out of this this slump like this year, or else they're going to be gone. So that's an interesting part of this as well.
And this comes back to, and I won't spend too much time on it, but like the conversations that started around quarterback evaluation and everything, and now the NFL doesn't know what they're doing and blah blah blah. But like, people don't talk about the fact that what you just pointed out, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll's jobs are on the line. You are coaching and you are GMing for your job. And sometimes that means you have to do things that are a bit rash to others, to the outside people. You have to take those chances, because you are quite literally trying to save your job in some aspects. And a lot of owners they're not comfortable with, like what we always talk about. We have this idea of like, well, let us just truly tank, or let us figure this out for 2 seasons. They don't want that. They need to sell tickets. They need to sell jerseys. So if you're sucking, they're not going to be happy. And so that results in situations where a guy may feel like he gets overdrafted. And a lot of the times it's still what the consensus had, like everybody's top prospects, this consensus was that order, like Mitch in 2017. Mitch was the number 1 quarterback on every single person's board for the most part.
But so many people rewrite that.
Exactly. But you do that, what the consensus and what everybody was doing at the time. And then in this situation, Shedeur aspect adds a new element to this, where the guy may have technically been a better quarterback prospect, but you're also drafting the person. You have to have a guy that you want in your locker room. And so they are now hitching their cart, and maybe they try to ride out, the Russell and Jameis train as long as they can. Because Jameis is good for at least the first game he comes in, he's going to ball out. That's what he does.
He's going to ball out, exactly.
Russell, complete wild card now, though. You have no idea what you're going to get from him. But they are now hitched to that. And again, to your point, like their jobs are on the line, and now Jackson Dart will probably be the thing that determines if they're here or not. And then to your point with Daboll, the next guy is now probably going to have Jackson Dart. That did not draft him if it doesn't work out this year and they get fired, even if Dart isn't the reason why.
Yeah, exactly, dude. And it also just speaks to the interesting nature of the quarterback position in football. It's such a unique sport and such a unique position, because that's how valuable it is, man. Like, teams do weird things for this position because it's so critical for your team's success. You can have the best roster in the NFL and have a bad quarterback, and it's just not going to work. So that's why you see things like this. That's why giving up 2 third-round picks to jump up 10 spots or whatever it was, it's just not crazy, because you're going for the most important position in football and in sports in general. So we'll see how it works out. I mean, it's gonna kind of depend on, like, it's gonna be what decides their job or not, kind of like we're saying, like, because Russell Wilson and Jameis, I get it. Like, it could work for a few games, but it's just, don't be surprised at all when Jackson Dart comes in midway through this season, because like the Giants aren't going to win with Russell Wilson. I just think, I think that's pretty clear at this point. So we'll see how it works out, but good process.
Yeah. And, their offensive line is still in a rough spot as well. So that's going to play a role in this. And, as a Titans fan with Will Levis, he is what he is, the memeness, but also it's so hard to evaluate a guy who's thrown behind an offensive line that's trying to get him killed. That being said, Drake May still looked good behind one of those, but it's still really hard to truly evaluate your guy when the offensive line is not helping them out. So in the current state of it too, it'd feel pretty rough to have to throw Dart behind that and let him try to figure it out. So we'll be fascinated to see what happens, but they do double up on bridge quarterback contracts as options, so they can kind of pivot between the two if they need to, if they don't feel comfortable putting Dart out there. But yeah, again, I agree. Love that process. So we touched on their third. They get Darius Alexander, and then the 4th round, they get one of the favorites of the entire draft, Cam Skattebo, absolute dog that people want in their locker room. People thought the Giants needed a new running back with Saquon being gone. That's still sensitive. And honestly, Tyrone Tracy's looking like a fantastic late round pick for them. Cam Skatteboo's a very different skill set than that. So you now can pair him together with him and have a pretty interesting backfield.
Yeah, man. And that Saquon discussion is an interesting one for the offseason. We might get into that a little bit there in the offseason. But yeah, adding Skatteboo to this offense, into this room, into this locker room, dude, I just love it, dude. I mean, Skatteboo is going to be a contributor, man. I don't know if he's going to be an all-pro or a Pro Bowler or whatever, but he's going to make a contribution to this team some way or another. He's just one of the funnest players to watch last year in college football, dude. He was just so fun to watch, so electric in the championship game and also the playoffs, the college football playoffs. So yeah, man, just really fun to watch. And listen, like Tyrone Tracy has looked good. There's no doubt about that, but he's going to compete for reps. I think he's going to compete for reps right away. So love that pick in the 4th round.
Yeah, a fan favorite, character guy, locker room guy, absolute dog. Dude runs like he's, a bowling ball out there. So love adding that to this offense. And they take a guy who fell pretty far with incredible value of getting Marcus Mbow, the tackle out of Purdue in the 5th round, who I think a lot of people expected to go on day 2. So adding him in the 5th, and then Thomas Fedone, the 2nd tight end of Nebraska, who is just a, kind of like an elite run blocking tight end. So adding 2 guys that kind of add pieces to that offensive line blocking situation up front, where he could come in and Marcus Mbow could immediately come in and be competing for that right tackle job.
I agree. Or interior. A lot of people project.
True, he could bump inside. Yeah.
I mean, I don't be surprised at all, Giants fans, if you got a starting offensive lineman. We'll just call him lineman because he could really play any of these positions in the 5th round. So I absolutely loved that value, man. I mean, he was like a projected 3rd round player. So getting him in the 5th, I mean, listen, this Giants draft is phenomenal, dude. They got a bunch of contributors. That's why it's also kind of sad with this Joe Shane and Dayball situation, because I feel like their last couple of drafts, man, they have just been really, really good. And so this might be a situation, if they do get fired, if they are a year away from rebuilding this team, this could be a really good situation to come into for the potential next regime.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, you're looking at a roster right now that has, I think, roughly 5 or so starters on it from last year's draft, including an elite wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, who looked phenomenal in his rookie season. The running, getting Tyrone Tracy, Theo Johnson at tight end, Tyler Nubin looked fantastic at safety. So yeah, to your point, now adding another class that looks really good on paper to this. I mean, if they don't survive this next season, the next regime is coming into a much better situation than I think both of them walked into.
No doubt.
So will be really interesting to see what happens for New York this season. They take Corey Black, corner out of Oklahoma State, in the 7th to wrap out their class. Good in zone coverage. He's kind of a zone guy. Another guy, add competition. Saying that to a corner room that is decent. They signed Paul Sinadebo, the corner from New Orleans, that was out of Stanford from a few years back, and they also signed Javon Holland. So I got to mention that they did get Holland to that big contract. Was kind of the top safety prospect, still really young. So a very, very revamped secondary from a few years ago. When I know as a Titans fan they had signed Adoree, and he was kind of leading the room for them. It looks a lot better now. So love that. Yeah.
But interesting thing about Corey Black, I didn't have much to say about him, but he's currently listed as their 2nd string left outside cornerback. That's interesting. If he can end up actually making contribution as a 7th round pick, that's like I said, man. It just speaks to this draft, and they really nailed their picks, man. It was fantastic process. They drafted valuable positions. They didn't screw up number 3 overall. And I know that kind of like, again, I'll say I don't give them a ton of credit for that, but we've seen so many teams do it in the past. So overall, dude, these players, whether it's for this current regime or not, it's for this current GM and head coach or not, they are going to be great New York Giants down the line, dude, and will help rebuild this team at some point.
Absolutely. And they did have this whole division had at least one interesting UDFA signing from guys that we kind of expected to go a little bit higher. So they get Antoine Wells, the which it kind of like what the Titans did, and we'll touch on that eventually. But you also get a UDFA that is your new rookie quarterback, a guy he played with. But Juice Wells, as he's called, from Ole Miss, was at South Carolina and was phenomenal as a sophomore, and ends up transferring and kind of got stuck on the depth chart a bit, behind Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins. So a guy that this time last year or 2 years ago was looking like a much higher round pick goes as undrafted, and they sign him along with like 6 other wide receivers. So they clearly want to add some competition to that room behind Malik Neighbors. But yeah, like what they did, and adding more wide receivers to that room is a smart move for the Giants. So with that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the G-Men?
Favorite pick for the G-Men. A lot of options on this one, I'll be honest. I mean, I could really pick any of these picks. I'm going to go their 5th rounder, though. Marcus Mebo.
Okay.
He is going to make a contribution on this offensive line, dude. Great, just a great consensus value. And that's something that I just kind of I'm drawn towards, because the consensus board just kind of ends up being the best indicator of the draft class. And so getting him in the 5th round is fantastic, and you're going to plug a hole on that offensive line.
Love it. I would go Scatterboo, but I'm not going to go Scatterboo. Love him. I as a running back prospect, not as high, but still love him as a dude you want in your locker room. But I'm going to go Darius Alexander.
Love it.
I think the value of him at the top of the 3rd is fantastic, and they've kind of had a hole next to Dexter Lawrence on the interior for a minute. It was kind of Dexter and friends lately. So adding him there, who could compete for that starting job alongside Dexter Lawrence immediately, is fantastic value in the 3rd round. He can pass rush. He can do a little bit of everything. So help take the load off of Dexter, which will also make him play even better, and make that defensive line just absolutely disgusting for the Giants.
Exactly,
so,
dude. That is an intriguing part of this draft, dude. You may have just turned a solid defensive line into the best in the NFL in one draft class.
Literally, at the very minimum, an elite one.
Exactly.
So what does the consensus grade say for the Giants?
Number 2 overall draft class, right behind the Patriots. Don't disagree with this at all, man. Just looking back to the Giants draft before we got on and did this today, I'm like, wow, this is a really, really good draft class. They are headed in the right direction, man. Getting a draft back-to-back drafts, which, listen, part of this is just because you're bad and you're drafting high, but back-to-back drafts with Malik Neighbors and Abdul Carter, I mean, those are franchise-changing players, dude, at the outside of quarterback, at the 2 most valuable positions on the football field. They just have to hit the quarterback, and I'm not going to sell y'all Kool-Aid. Jackson Dart may or may not be that guy. We'll see down the line, but if they can get it right at QB, man, this roster is looking a lot better than it was a few years ago.
And you hit a really good point. One of the things that John Mara was worried about with the Saquon thing was losing that kind of franchise guy, the face of the franchise. And I think they've added 2. Because, regardless of Dart, but Malik Neighbors is that guy. He's wide receiver 1 written all over him. I want my wide receiver 1 to be a diva. I want Malik Neighbors saying all this stuff about he wants more catches. You want to see that from your wide receiver 1.
No doubt.
And then Abdul wanting Lawrence Taylor's number. The audacity of it's a bit interesting, but that tells you he's got that personality that you kind of want another LT like that coming off the edge. So they may just found their 2 guys that can be the face of their franchise. And I think that I love that for them as well. And then adding the other layer of Dart is really interesting. So definitely agree they had a fantastic class, and really fascinated to see what they do this year, with Russell probably starting and then seeing how things go from there. But that is the Giants 2025 class, and that wraps up the NFC East review. We'll be working on, I think, the South's next. So AFC and NFC South will be coming out next, followed shortly by the AFC and NFC West, trying to get those out this week as well. We've been releasing some individual team videos, so check those out if you want to just dive into a specific team's draft. We have a lot of those sitting out there now from the past few that we've done. And, please subscribe, follow, share, do all those fun things. Leave some comments. Let us know what you thought about each of these drafts. We'd love to see what you guys think and provide our feedback. But until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.